Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. The Pakistan Army says it is ready to give a befitting response to any Indian aggression, just like it did in February last year after the Pulwama attack in Kashmir. In a media briefing, the Director General of Military's media wing, Major General Babar Iftikhar, said the entire world acknowledged Pakistan's victory over India after it shot down 2 Indian warplanes and arrested a pilot. He added that Indian Wing Commander Abhinandan Varthaman was released as a gesture of peace and under Geneva Conventions. In France, at least 3 people have been killed and several others injured in a knife attack in the southern city of Nice. Nice Mayor Christian Coleman says a suspect has been detained in the incident near the Notre Dame Church. Azerbaijan says its security forces have shot down 2 Armenian fighter jets that sought to launch airstrikes in the Gubadli area. The downing of the warplanes comes the day after Azerbaijan blamed Armenia for the killing of 21 people in a missile attack in the Barda city. Armenia has denied the claim. Over 1,100 soldiers have been killed in the ongoing fighting over the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh since the 27th of September. France and Germany have imposed a second national lockdown after a record spike in COVID-19 cases. India reported 517 deaths overnight, with the death toll crossing 120,000. The country's total number of infections has crossed 8 million. In Pakistan, the virus has claimed 16 lives overnight, with the death toll rising to 6,775, while globally 1.17 million people have lost their lives to the virus, while nearly 44.5 million have been infected. Well, these were the top stories. News is coming in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, the Pakistan Army says it is ready to give a befitting response to any Indian aggression, just like it did in February last year after the Pulwama attack in Kashmir.
In a media briefing, the Director General of Military's media wing, Major General Babar Iftikhar, said the entire world acknowledged Pakistan's victory over India after it shot down 2 Indian warplanes and captured a pilot. He added that Indian Wing Commander Abhinandan Varthaman was released as a gesture of peace and under Geneva Conventions. Major General Babar Iftikhar said the armed forces are keeping a watchful eye on the regional security situation. Earlier, Prime Minister Imran Khan and Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa discussed the country's security situation during a meeting in Islamabad.
Well, now also Pakistan has strongly condemned the republication of blasphemous caricatures by a satirical magazine in France. In the weekly press briefing, Foreign Office spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said Pakistan is alarmed at the highly disturbing statements by certain politicians justifying such heinous acts under the garb of freedom of expression. Chaudhry said equating Islam with terrorism for narrow electoral and political gains is condemnable. Commenting on the recent provocative statements by the Indian National Security Advisor, the spokesperson said Ajit Doval has implied organizing attacks inside neighboring countries. He said India is trying to stock terrorism in its neighboring countries. The spokesperson urged the international community to take notice of these irresponsible and bellicose remarks by the Indian leadership. Now, in France, 3 people have been killed and several injured in a knife attack in the southern city of Nice. Police say victims include a woman who was decapitated at a church. Nice Mayor Christian Coleman says a suspect has been detained. In a tweet, he urged people of Nice to avoid the area to let the police and emergency services work. French anti-terrorist prosecutors department says it has been asked to probe the attack. President Emmanuel Macron is attending an urgent crisis meeting at Interior Ministry. Meanwhile, French lawmakers observed a minute of silence for the victims. This comes as France reels from the beheading of a school teacher in Paris by a man of Chechen origin. Moving on, in Afghanistan, at least 8 prisoners have been killed in a riot in a facility in western Herat province. Officials say 12 others were injured, but the situation is now under control. They say the injured prisoners have taken to the hospital. The Afghan government says the unrest ensued as police began clearing some partitions created by prisoners in a block. But a Taliban spokesperson disputed the account, saying the riot began after police started abusing prisoners during the shifting. Now, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has reiterated his country's support to peace and stability in Afghanistan. In a meeting with Afghanistan's Minister for Industry, Nisan Goriani, Khan emphasized the need for a negotiated political settlement. The Prime Minister highlighted the close fraternal ties between the two countries. He added that peace in Afghanistan will be beneficial for the entire region. Khan said it will not only enhance regional connectivity but will also provide new opportunities for economic cooperation. He said Pakistan and Afghanistan have untapped economic synergies. The visiting minister lauded Pakistan's positive role in facilitating the Afghan peace process. Moving on now, Azerbaijan says its security forces have shot down 2 Armenian fighter jets that sought to launch airstrikes in the Gubadli area. The downing of the warplanes comes a day after Azerbaijan blamed Armenia for the killing of 21 people in a missile attack in the Bada city. Now, Armenia has denied the claims. 3 casualties, 3 ceasefires have so far failed to take hold as world powers struggle to mediate a lasting truce. Now, over 1,100 soldiers have been killed in the ongoing fighting over the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh since the 27th of September. While the internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan but controlled by the ethnic Armenians. Now, the US has ruled out talks over a technical solution of Turkey's procurement of the Russian S-400 missile defense system. The US Assistant Secretary of State for Military and Political Affairs Clark Cooper says Turkey will have to abandon its plans of operationalizing S-400 if it wants the 5th-generation NATO F-35 jets. Addressing a virtual event, he said the US has given multiple options to Turkey to meet the requirements to ensure their air defense. Now, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has called on the United Nations to hold urgent talks for an international peace conference. In a letter to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Abbas urged him to coordinate with the Quartet on the Middle East. Abbas said the conference will help pave the way for a serious peace process based on international law. He said the conference should put an end to Israel's occupation and help Palestinians achieve their freedom. Earlier, the UN Security Council convened a virtual open debate on current developments in the Middle East. Meanwhile, the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen says it has destroyed 6 drones launched by the Houthi rebels. Coalition spokesman Turki al-Maliki said the explosive-laden drones targeted Saudi civilian facilities. He said the coalition forces are taking steps to ensure people remain safe from the rebel attacks. Now, this comes just a day after the coalition destroyed 3 ballistic missiles fired towards Saudi cities of Jazan, Najran and Khamis Mushaid. Now, the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has replaced his interior minister and named 3 security hawks to new roles. In an attempt to tighten his grip on the country, the head of Minsk police, Ivan Kubrakov, was appointed interior minister. Kubrakov's predecessor Yuri Karayev was one of the 3 men named to the new roles as presidential aides. The 3 men are also named as inspectors responsible for key regions of the country. Lukashenko's position appears more secure after a national strike called by the opposition failed to bring the economy to a halt. The country has been rocked by mass protests since August's controversial presidential election. Now moving on to Venezuela, whose president Nicolas Maduro has accused Spain of helping an opposition member, Leopoldo Lpez, flee the country. In a press conference, Maduro said the Spanish ambassador to Venezuela, Gio Silva, will be expelled over his involvement in the affair. Lpez, who fled to Spain on Sunday, stayed at Silva's residence after escaping from house arrest. Meanwhile, Maduro revealed that Venezuela's Umrah oil refinery was targeted by a powerful weapon in a terrorist attack. He added Venezuela has gasoline reserves equivalent to 20 days of consumption.
Yesterday, the Umrah refinery was attacked with a powerful weapon, a powerful long weapon that we are investigating to determine what type of weapon it was, one of the most important refineries in Venezuela and Latin America. They wanted to cause a total explosion at the Umrah refinery. They demolished a tower with a level of thickness in steel that is superior to a war tank.
Well, also talking about the upcoming National Assembly election, Maduro said over 300 foreign observers will monitor the December 6 polls. Now moving on to France and Germany, who have imposed a second national lockdown after a record spike in COVID-19 cases, while India reported 517 deaths overnight, with the death toll crossing 120,000. The country's total number of infections has crossed 8 million. While globally, 1.17 million people have lost their lives through the virus, while nearly 44.5 million have been infected. We have details in this report.
The surging cases in the second wave of COVID-19 pandemic have wiped out months of gains. Europe and the United States are particularly being battered by the second coming of the virus. A new wave of curbs has swept through Europe, resembling the blanket lockdowns earlier in spring. France, Italy, Germany, Poland, and many other European nations have been registering record daily cases. While the only hope out of this whirlpool is a cure, the delivery of potential vaccines is likely only from April next year.
In best case scenarios, we could see monthly deliveries of about 20 to 15 million doses of vaccines. The moment the first companies start to signal that they are on the road, the big numbers of supplies are due to start in April.
Over in Asia, too, India's top laboratories say their trials of Russian Sputnik V vaccine are expected to be concluded only by March 2021. China and South Korea, two countries that handled the virus best, are also witnessing a spike in new COVID-19 cases. Meanwhile, the pandemic is now hitting Russia's far-off regions as the country sends army doctors to fight the virus in the Ural Mountains.
We're not talking about the second wave of the pandemic, but as we have discussed just this morning, some regions are facing the first wave now, according to experts. We have to monitor the situation closely and react in time and efficiently.
In Latin America, Mexico has surpassed 90,000 confirmed deaths just a day after it crossed 900,000 infections.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has registered 16 more deaths from COVID-19 overnight, pushing the toll to 6,775. The Health Ministry says 908 people have tested positive for the virus in the last 24 hours. The ministry added there are 11,695 active cases in the country. It added 624 COVID-19 patients across the country are in critical condition. It said out of over 331,000, more than 312,000 people have recovered so far. Meanwhile, the National Command and Operations Center has made it mandatory to wear face masks at public places. It said all commercial areas, including shopping malls and restaurants, will close by 10 p.m. local time. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Pakistan's Council of Islamic Ideology has approved the construction of a new temple in Islamabad. In a ruling, the council said Islamic law allows minorities a place of worship. Prime Minister Imran Khan had promised $600,000 for the temple's construction. The ruling has left an open possibility that money can be distributed among Hindu communities to use as they see fit. It is expected that Prime Minister Imran Khan will give a formal order to allow the temple's construction. Member of Parliament and Hindu leader Lal Malhi has praised the ruling of the Islamic Council. Now, about 3,000 Hindus live in the country's capital, Islamabad. Now, Saudi Arabia says it will open the Umrah pilgrimage for Muslims from other countries from the 1st of November. The state media made the announcement as the kingdom relaxed measures it had taken to check the spread of the coronavirus. Saudi Arabia closed its borders in February to foreign Umrah pilgrims, and in March the kingdom stopped its own citizens and residents from taking part. A limited number of domestic pilgrims were allowed to perform the Hajj in July. The US has warned American citizens in the UAE and Saudi Arabia against potential terror attacks. In a statement, the US Embassy in Dubai said it has reports that terrorist groups can attack its citizens and interests. It asked Americans in the region to remain alert. The US Embassy in the Saudi capital Riyadh also warned American citizens of the possibility of a missile or drone attack. This coincides with an escalation of attacks by Yemen's Houthi rebels against the kingdom. Meanwhile, Myanmar's opposition parties have urged the government to postpone the general election due to rising cases of COVID-19. But the country's leader Aung San Suu Kyi says the November 8 vote must go ahead. Wearing a mask and protective gloves, Suu Kyi cast an early vote at a polling station in Naip Yi Tao. The vote is said to serve as a test of Myanmar's first democratic government in half a century and transition from the direct military rule. Suu Kyi's international reputation has slumped over Myanmar's treatment of Rohingya Muslims, but she remains popular at home. With nearly 50,000 COVID-19 cases and over 1,000 deaths, Myanmar is facing one of Southeast Asia's worst outbreaks. The U.S. state of Pennsylvania has opposed a nighttime curfew in Philadelphia to contain the ongoing civil unrest. In a statement, Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf said he has mobilized state National Guard troops to assist law enforcement agencies. In a statement, the city managing director's office said police made 172 arrests over 2 nights. It added among these protesters are charged with assaulting police officers. The statement read 53 police officers were injured during the clashes with protesters. Black Lives Matter protests reignited in the city after police fatally shot a black person allegedly armed with a knife. Now moving to Vietnam, where at least 31 people have been killed as Typhoon Lpez thrashed the Southeast Asian country's coastline. Around 48 others are missing in landslides triggered by the torrential rains from the typhoon. The landslides, which hit remote areas in the central province of Quang Nam, killed 19. The state media said 12 fishermen died at the sea. The government says it has deployed hundreds of soldiers and heavy machinery to search for the survivors. Now, in a statement, Deputy Prime Minister Trin Din Dung said the bad weather was hampering rescue efforts. The typhoon has left millions of people without electricity and damaged 56,000 houses so far. Lpez has weakened to a tropical depression after making landfall and is expected to reach Laos later today. Meanwhile, in the U.S., Hurricane Zeta has slammed the state of Louisiana with winds of up to 175 kilometers per hour, bashing the Gulf Coast up to Mississippi. Officials forecast life-threatening conditions as a 55-year-old man died after being electrocuted by a downed power line. The storm left 875,000 customers without electricity in Louisiana, Mississippi and Alabama. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says Zeta's winds made it a strong Category 2 storm. It said rain of 2 to 4 inches is expected from the Gulf Coast to the central Appalachians. Louisiana's Governor John Edwards has urged residents to take shelter, promising immediate rescue and recovery aid. The Trump administration has declared an emergency, providing additional federal resources to Louisiana. Now in Warsaw, thousands took to the streets for the 7th day against a court ruling that further limits Poland's abortion laws. Police warned demonstrators not to target churches again after some services were disrupted and buildings defaced in an earlier protest. After marching through the center of the Polish capital, protesters stopped outside the parliament. Last week, the top court ruled that abortion due to fatal abnormalities was not permissible under the constitution. Demonstrators blame the nationalist government of Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki for the verdict. More protests are planned across Poland later this week. Moving on, Peru has reported its first case of diphtheria in 20 years amid an alarmingly low vaccination rate due to COVID-19. Public Health Vice Minister Louisiana said a 5-year-old girl living in the capital Lima was diagnosed with the respiratory infection. Suarez said she was stable and being monitored closely by the doctors. He said health authorities had issued just 40% of their planned diphtheria and tetanus vaccination so far. The government has issued a national epidemiological alert to detect other potential cases, bolster vaccinations and curb any potential wider outbreak. Meanwhile, in Yemen, conflicts, climate change and the weak economic growth are leaving more people without enough to eat. The coronavirus pandemic has contributed to making the situation even worse. We have more details in this report.
The United Nations warns nearly 100,000 children are at risk of dying in Yemen due to malnutrition that has increased about 10% in 2020. The country is approaching a dire food security crisis. The UN observes that cases of children with severe acute malnutrition are rising at alarming rates.
We are receiving many malnutrition patients and seeing many deaths caused by the poor economic conditions and the inability of parents to come to the hospitals because of the economic conditions.
The UN describes this as the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with 80% of the population reliant on humanitarian aid.
We call upon the United Nations to break the siege for our children and so that we can live in peace. Our children are dying and falling ill and they have done nothing wrong. The whole world is conspiring against Yemen and against us and our children.
Despite a difficult operating environment, humanitarians continue to work across Yemen. According to a report, if acute malnutrition is left untreated, around 20 to 30% of children will die each year.
Now in Australia, scientists say they have discovered a coral reef that exceeds the height of the Empire State Building and the Eiffel Tower. Details in this report.
A team of scientists from James Cook University, led by Dr. Robin Bayman, found a coral reef on the Great Barrier Reef. Bayman said it was the first detached reef of this size to be discovered in over 120 years.
So we know that the base of it is around 1.5 kilometres long. It's nearly exactly 500 metres tall, so it's far higher than Sydney Tower or the Eiffel Tower, even the Empire State Building. They look quite tiny next to it. It comes up to quite a point. It's very blade-like in plan view. The top of it, the shallowest part of it, is about 300 metres wide and about 50 metres across.
The scientists filmed their mountain climb of the new reef using the underwater robot Sebastian. The collected marine samples will be placed in the Queensland Museum and the Museum of Tropical Queensland.
We didn't see any evidence of bleaching or even damage from that bleaching event. That's not to say it hasn't occurred, but to our eyes, here we are 4 years later, what we saw instead was quite a thriving coral reef and sponge community. Probably more fish than we've seen on any of the other ROV dives, a real blizzard of fish over the summit.
The discovery comes after a study said the Great Barrier Reef has lost more than half its coral in the last 3 decades. It was listed as World Heritage by UNESCO in 1981 and called the most extensive and spectacular coral reef ecosystem on the planet.
Now, hotels in Cuba are turning to urban agriculture to attract tourists after COVID-19 brought the industry to a halt. Details in this report.
Some 30 hotels in Cuba's top beach resort of Veradero started receiving foreign tourists once again after 7 months of quarantine. They are growing fresh herbs and vegetables on site, hoping they will act as a draw and entice guests to stay. Here they grow radishes, green beans, basil, corn and mint among other plants that are then used in dishes and cocktails in restaurants and bars.
We use these herbs, mainly aromatic herbs, which go from the garden to our kitchens and our bars. Everything planted here is an organic product.
The hotels follow strict protocols for reducing the spread of new coronavirus. These include testing all visitors upon arrival at the airport, checking their temperature frequently at tourist installations, and enforcing the obligatory use of face masks in communal spaces.
They are producing natural things at the hotel that are good for the body. They don't make you feel bad. It's something fresh, even though lemon is very acidic. This is like an appetizer to a new type of food.
Cuba closed its borders in March to contain infection, but has progressively started opening up again to tourism, a key source of much-needed hard currency. The country is seeking to sell itself as a safe destination in the sun, given its textbook handling of the outbreak.
A Belgian chocolatier has been crowned the world's best pastry chef by a jury of independent reporters. This has enhanced Belgium's reputation as a producer of top-class chocolate. Details in this report.
Pierre Marcolini, who has opened boutiques from Germany to China, won the award for Best Chocolatier in a competition organized by world pastry stars. Known for his minimalist style, Marcolini's chocolates have become luxury gifts, with some boxes selling for more than €100. Marcolini says he hopes chocolate could comfort people during the coronavirus pandemic.
We are obviously in a gloomy period where people are confused due to complicated future prospects, hardships, and difficult communication. Therefore, I think the best thing you can do is end up at home with a bar of chocolate, a box of pralines, and a box of chocolates. It is comforting, it gives pleasure, and it brings happiness.
Le côté réconfortant.
Jury of the World Pastry Stars said the prize also took into account his commitment to the responsible sourcing of cocoa beans from Cuba, Ecuador, Venezuela, Madagascar, Cameroon, and Vietnam.
From the start, and this is the little secret, Belgian chocolatiers crushed the beans to less than 25 micrometers, which allowed them to have a much finer, smoother, much more refined chocolate than the one that you could find in Europe. Even today, we still have this reputation of having chocolates with a certain delicacy and a certain aromatic note.
Belgium boasts more than 200 chocolate firms, over 2,000 chocolate stores and museums, and workshops such as the Brussels Museum of Cocoa and Chocolate.
Well, we have business news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Russian President Vladimir Putin has praised his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump for his role in stabilizing global oil markets, but the president slammed the U.S. administration for sanctioning Russia 46 times. Putin's remarks came 5 days before Trump runs against Democratic rival Joe Biden in the U.S. presidential election. Earlier, the Russian president said he is not ruling out OPEC Plus to delay the easing of the cuts or even making further reductions. Russia's crude oil exports dropped by 7.9% year-over-year from January to August. Now, the European Central Bank says new COVID-19 restrictions have increased the risk of a double-dip recession in the zone. Bank Supervisor Christian Coleman said the baseline scenario of recession cannot be taken for granted. She said the new curbs have increased uncertainty for households, corporates and banks alike. A new wave of blanket lockdowns has swept through many nations of Europe as COVID-19 pandemic batters the region. Now, the Wall Street stocks have surged following a hike in the shares of major tech companies ahead of their quarterly earnings reports. Stocks of Amazon, Apple, Alphabet and Facebook climbed before the release of their earnings reports. More than 270 companies of the S&P 500 have reported third-quarter earnings so far. Meanwhile, the U.S. jobless claims fell by 40,000 to hit 751,000 in a latest release of Labor Department data. The U.S. Commerce Department says the country's economy has risen at its fastest pace on record in the third quarter. The economy rebounded at an annual rate of 33.1%. Now in football, Marcus Rashford's hat-trick has helped Manchester United crush RB Leipzig 5-0 in their Champions League encounter. Rashford netted 3 goals in 16 minutes. Teenage forward Mason Greenwood opened the scoring for United in the 21st minute. Rashford capitalised on United's lead, making it 2-0 in the 74th minute. He moved on to score United's third goal, followed by Anthony Martial, who added the fourth from the penalty spot. United are at the tops of the group with 6 points, followed by PSG and Leipzig with 3 each. World 100-meter champion Christian Coleman has been banned for 2 years after missing 3 drug tests. Suspended from 14th of May 2020, the American sprinter will miss the postponed Tokyo Olympics next year. In a statement, the Athletics Integrity Unit said Coleman can appeal the decision to the Court of Arbitration of Sport. Two-time world champion has 30 days to file an appeal. Coleman won 100-meter gold at the World Championships in Doha in 2019. He was provisionally suspended in June after missing the third test in December 2019. 3 whereabouts failures in a 12-month period can result in a ban of up to 2 years. Well, now let's have a look at the weather updates across the world. With the weather updates, we come to the end of this bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.